Welcome guys, does this face look familiar to you? Well, it probably won't in the near future anymore, because we have the announced nerf for the Grim Patron Warrior deck. As you might remember, I already made a discussion video about I feel whether or not Grim Patron Warrior as a deck should be nerfed in general, and the answer was basically no, because both the results in tournaments and the prevalence on ladder didn't really give a reason to do so, or to say that the deck was overpowered in general. However, I agree that it wasn't fun to play against sometimes, and that the combos it could pull off were ridiculous, but that's like another choice of game design. However, we have now the nerf announced, which looks like this. So we have the old Warsong Commander on the left, which basically says it gives minions charges that have 3 or less attack, and the new card that says that it gives +1 attack to minions that already have charge. And this is like a change that basically completely destroys the card, right? I mean, a 3 mana 2/3 isn't great and should do something really good, and it doesn't. So my first impression about this on Twitter was this one. That it's one of these to the ground nerfs again, and there would have been tons of possibilities to nerf the frustration of Patron Warrior, but not completely destroy the deck. So as it turned out, Grim Patron as a deck in its whole wasn't that strong anyways, so it would have definitely weakened the deck and maybe made it like unplayable in a very competitive environment, like let's say top legend ranks or tournament plays, but it would have been like a Death Rattle Shaman or something. It could have been a gimmick deck, or at least like a tier 3 deck option that people would have had if they enjoyed the style of the deck. However, Warsong Commander is now out of the deck, and therefore destroys a lot of what made Patron Warrior really strong, and I doubt that it will have its place in the meta after the nerf hits, which, if we see at the bottom of the post, of the blue post, means the time frame for this patch is currently for the next week plan. So my second tweet about this was that the timing was really weird again. So, the TGT release was basically 1 week before the last call qualifier for the EU region, which mean, and I competed in this last call qualifier. But what did this mean? Well, 1 week is very little time in terms of first preparing. Especially if you work, right? You had basically 1 weekend to practice. And the second thing is there is no settled meta. So you basically spend like a week on trying decks, trying out new decks if they work, or just practicing with old decks and trying them against new decks. But the few practice partners I have, like in my friend list, I asked them whether or not we wanted to practice, and they were like, no, I have to like figure out what new decks might be good, and maybe like right before the last call qualifier I might have a setup that we could practice with against. But the whole thing of these changes is they shaken up things, which is good, but you can't really predict what happens afterwards if there is a little time span. So you first have to figure out like what might happen afterwards, and then you have to react to this, build a lineup, and then practice with this lineup if the thoughts that you had were actually sufficient. So this requires a decent amount of time, which means that for the World Championships we might actually see players lose basically because they didn't have enough time, or because they didn't like adjust right into the time, because they were like taken by surprise by something, which is of course a skill by itself, but you can't like 100% predict what will happen. So you always have like a more amount of luck, even in the meta. Before you actually start the game, there is more luck involved, which I feel isn't really the right way to balance things. So actually I feel they could have like given the info out a little bit earlier, They also could have released TGT like 3 or 4 weeks before the last qualifiers. I'm not really happy with the timing Blizzard chose here, but let's not discuss this too much. I think we can agree that like a few more weeks would have been better for all these formats. But let's give it like to a design space. What do you think of the nerf itself? Well, it has of course different dimensions we have to discuss, and one of them is the future design space, and that's what is given here in this text. Also, that charge, Ben Brode said this one time also in this statement, which was in an interview on, I think, The Angry Chicken. I highlighted the important part. The hardest thing for us is to provide tools for spells and charge minions, because you need to provide those tools in advance, right? If you have 12 HP, there's nothing you can do against double fireball. And if you have 20 HP, there's nothing you can do against like a charging patron board with frothing berserkers and stuff. So it's hard for a design team to balance charge in the first place, and then you also have like the Warsong Commander, which might hinder future design space, because every card that has like 3 or less attack has to be balanced with Warsong Commander in mind, which is, I feel, a little bit less bad because it's a warrior card, so you have to make a warrior deck with it and not, let's say, a druid deck with Warsong Commander, a bunch of 3 attack Raging Worgans, and then something like Savage Roar or something. But it's still a thing that the designers have to keep in mind if they make a 2 or 3 attack minion that has some special ability, like the Grim Patron, for example. So from a design perspective, I can see that Warsong Commander was like a failure of implementing it into the game in general. However, I feel that what happened to the card now, which is, if we see the right one again, charge minions plus 1 attack for 3 mana 2/3 is just basically garbage. And the worst thing I feel about this is that it's a class basic card, which means it's a common card, which also means that if we look at Arena, for example, Blizzard totally passed up an opportunity of giving Warriors, which is the worst class at the moment, a sufficient basic class card minion. And actually the Warsong Commander we see now is way worse even in Arena, where you could pull off like a 5, 6, 8 mana combo to come back into the game to have some fast answers with like, I don't know, charging knife jugglers as such. But now you have a really garbage card that is basically like worse raid leader from its effect, and from its stats it's worse than the 2/3 Wind Fury guy or the Patron Warrior, for example, which are neutral cards. So the basic class card is now below everything else. So they could have made it, for example, a 2 mana card to give Warriors a 2/3 common card that has some ability, or made it like a good minion card for Warriors in general to be played in Arena, for example. So this is like a change that I don't really understand. It is like the same with Buzzard. So I understand that every beast thing had to be made with Buzzard in mind, like the Ball of Spiders and the old Starving Buzzard, the 2 mana minion that gave you a card for every new beast summoned. Might have given too big of a combo, but all these to the ground nerfs that really nerf the cards that you don't see them anymore is quite unfortunate, because they nerfed like the Eagle Horn Bow in the past. They nerfed Unleash the Hounds a few times, but these cards still see play because they're not nerfed to the ground, but they were nerfed in a reasonable manner. You also see like from the alpha and beta changes, the freezing effects are still in play if you play Freeze Mage and such. So overall, these cards were nerfed in a reasonable amount, But this nerf is just like way over the top, and they just destroyed the card and put it out of the game basically. Which is, as I pointed out, especially unfortunate because it hurts the warrior class, and they passed up a really good opportunity to give it at least to make it at least a sufficient arena card to pick. Because now, if something like Warsong Commander shows up between two other garbage cards, I don't know, like what's it called? The 1/4 charge taunt minion and the 1/4 Wind Fury minion, then you basically have no choice than picking a 3 mana 2/3, which most of the time in your whole arena run it might trigger like once if you play an Arcane Golem or a Wolf Rider or something afterwards. And it also doesn't really fit the theme of the whole warrior thing anyways. You can play it with Quarkrun Elite, of course, and make it a 5/3 charge, which basically makes it an Argent Warhorse. I don't know, it just is not enough. So back to the Patron Warrior, what do I think? Because Warsong Commander is basically only played in Patron Warrior, so what do I think about the future of the game itself without Patron Warriors, basically? As I pointed out, I didn't feel that the results backed up a nerf of the Patron Warrior, but I agree that the games were frustrating sometimes and also not really fun to watch in a way. But we have two dimensions of this nerf here. The first is that the tournament meta, at least, not the ladder meta, but the tournament meta, somewhat evolved around Patron Warriors, because everyone was bringing that, and people didn't really bring Face Hunters and mid-range Paladins for this reason, or maybe even Secret Paladins. Which is a little bit surprising, given that you only have to like face Patron Warrior once with these decks. But on the other hand, even in a best of 5, losing one game that you don't want to lose is a really huge deal. Because you might go down 2-0 easily and then just be eliminated. So people brought just overall sufficient decks, which was kind of tailored towards the meta. So we will see a different tournament meta, which is probably what Blizzard intended with the timing of the World Championships, since it's like the biggest advertisement for the game to newer players anyways. The second thing is that given that we will see a different meta, probably classes like Paladins and Hunters will crawl back into the tournament meta itself, and I don't think it will be less stale after a short period of time, simply because the Conquest format is not really good in like bringing innovation, because even if you bring a strong deck, it just wins once, and then it's gone anyways. So you're probably still encouraged to just bring overall solid decks, which will be like Paladin, Druid, Hunter, stuff like that. So we probably won't see too many new and surprising decks. Maybe BlizzCon to catch people by surprise because the time is so short. But the format is not really sufficient in not generating a stale tournament meta anyways. As for ladder, as I pointed out in the last video, I think we won't see too much of an impact, at least in the normal ranks people play. Because as I pointed out, like in my run from rank 4 to legend, I have seen just 2 Patron Warriors last season. In around like my last 30 games or so on ladder, I haven't seen Patron Warrior once. It was basically all like Fatigue and Control Warrior anyways. So I doubt that Secret Paladin will flood the ladder just even more just because Patron Warrior is gone, because it hasn't been prevalent on the ladder anyways. So overall, I think that the influences of the patch will not be that big, but just taking away one deck, some people like to play, some people like to enjoy, and what I find most important, a lot of people practiced a lot with, especially in the tournament scene, which is kind of fortunate for them, but it's a card game. Metas change every time. If TGT was more impactful, with their new cards, with their new changes. It would have changed anyways, right? So overall, I think the nerf is okay if they don't want it in their such a deck and like hinder their restrict their design space. I totally can appreciate that. But I feel that the way they nerfed the game, or not the game, but the card, is way over the top of what could happen, and that the timing is really unfortunate, and that they could have done a better job with this too. However, as always, I'm looking forward to what the meta brings us, what the later games will look like, and of course I will still be around with daily content of my later games anyways. So, would be nice to get your feedback as well. Let me know in the comments, or me and all the others know in the comments what you think of the nerf. If you like it, if you would have liked another suggestion or another way to nerf it. If you enjoyed Patron Warrior and later, and then I'll see you around tomorrow. Bye bye.